How's everybody doing? It's weird. I feel like I'm doing stand-up or something. Not like I do stand-up. But I don't plan my speeches. I like to come into a room, see what the vibe is, and see what comes to me. So we're gonna see how this goes. So first of all, I want to thank Natty and the team for inviting me to speak to everybody today. Much appreciated. And I'd like to thank you all for being here. Shout out to all the previous speakers. Everyone's been fantastic so far. So just about in the past couple hours, I've really just been thinking about what I want to talk about today. And I think I want to share a couple of stories literally from the past few hours, from yesterday, and looking towards tomorrow, and use that as an analogy to touch on some points that I think are very, very important. So last night, I was speaking to my dad. We were having a sort of just heart-to-heart conversation. I've been traveling around the US for the past 9 weeks, so it was really good to hang out with him and see him again. He's 72 years old. He's a medical doctor. He's still practicing. He's, wow, the man is a boss. People always ask me, Zuby, who's your role model? Who do you look up to? What do you like? I'm always like, my parents, my dad, my mother. Those are my role models, period. That simple. And that should really be the case for everybody in an ideal world, if you ask me. But I was talking to my dad, and I was talking to him about just hard work. And you know, the guy's in his 70s. He doesn't look it. People think he's in his 50s, and people think my mom is in her 30s. You know, black don't crack. Yeah, I was talking to him about all that, and I was sort of putting forward a little bit of a hypothesis, which is something I'd noticed. I've done no scientific research on this whatsoever, but I've noticed that it seems like when men stop working, so a lot of guys, when they go into retirement, it almost seems like that's the point when the clock starts ticking. That's when the brain, when everything really starts to degrade at an accelerating rate. So I was kind of talking to my dad about that because he's still working very hard. He's still traveling around the country doing his job as a doctor. From a financial perspective, realistically, he probably doesn't need to, but he knows he's got decades and decades of experience, knowledge, ability, skills, which are very rare, and he can help hundreds, thousands of people with that. He's still got his marbles there, so he wants to continue doing that as long as he can. And he himself was saying that, you know, if I stop doing this, then what's my purpose? The purpose of a man is to provide for his family, for society, for himself, for other people. And that really hit me because that's really what my parents and my father in particular have really done throughout my entire life. I'm the youngest of 5 children. And so my parents had 4 children. And then after I was born, in fact, my eldest sister was adopted because my parents figured, you know what? We have the ability to help another person out here. We're going to take another child into our family, and we're going to raise this girl as our own. Thank you. Thank you very much. Beyond that, I don't know how many people they've put through school, put through university, but if I look at my dad's own life, like he's not someone who ever toots his own horn at all. But when I look at what he's done and what he's achieved and how much he's done without wanting any kind of accolades or people to kind of big him up or win awards or shout him out or anything, it's crazy to me. It's just been personal sacrifice after personal sacrifice after personal sacrifice. My parents are both from Nigeria. That's where they grew up. My dad is one of 11 children. What was the year? I moved to Saudi Arabia when I was a baby, like 1987. 1987, he got a job offer in Saudi Arabia and left the country, left his family, left everybody to go and work in Saudi Arabia so he could better provide for his family and offer his children an even better life. A couple weeks after he went out there, he brought the other 6 of us with him. I think my mom traveled alone with 5 children. God bless her. I don't know how she did that. When I think of it, she was younger than me at that time. So that makes it even crazier for me. So they've done that, so working in Saudi Arabia for 20 years, and then coming back, moving to the UK. There's so much stuff that has just sort of happened that I've witnessed over the decades, and the more and more I learn about my own father, the more I just learn how much of an incredible individual he is and how much I strive to be a similar kind of man. So touching on that, I think, you know, we're living in this weird time in society where, as people have already alluded to, there's a lot of demonization about men and masculinity. There's a lot of questioning about what is the role of men in society. There's even the question, do we even need men? Are husbands necessary? Are brothers necessary? Are fathers even necessary, right? And I get concerned when I hear all these type of questions, when people are questioning it, do we even need fathers? Like, to me, that's such an insane concept, just as equally as insane it would be saying, do we need mothers in society? Of course we need mothers. Of course we need fathers. And I was having this conversation with my girlfriend earlier today, and it seems like, implicitly, it seems like most people, I believe, do understand and appreciate the role that women play in society, especially in the motherly role, especially in caretaker roles, especially in the ability to, how would I put it, be the people who, women literally create people. Like, that's amazing, right? We're not biologically wired to do that. Even when I identify as a woman, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And, you know, but I think that in those conversations, it always seems like the role that men play in society is glossed over. Like, it's not truly appreciated. People don't really think about it. And I think the amount of stuff that men do in society all across the world, in this country, without recognition, and perhaps not even wanting that recognition, like it's almost just assumed that, yeah, just go do it, right? We live in peacetime right now, but if you look throughout history, you're looking at previous wars, you're looking at, you know, who's being sent out to fight these battles, who's being sent out to do this, who's been sent out to do all these dangerous jobs. It's always men, right? It's always men. There's nobody. Okay, what people like to talk about gender equality in jobs, and we want to get this job to 50-50, we want to get that job to 50. It's never a dangerous job. Never. Let's be real. It's never a dangerous job, okay? And that sort of thing always strikes me. So it's always like, okay, so you want it there and there and there, but why not there? Why not there? That's a high-paying job. Why don't you want to be a lumberjack? How about working in sanitation? How about crab fishing, working on an oil rig? Oh, a whole bunch of jobs, right? And that sort of thing has always stuck out to me. And this isn't even saying that I think women should really pursue those jobs. Again, we live in this weird time where you're supposed to accept that men and women are really, really different, whilst also accepting that they're totally the same and have totally the same interests and totally the same physical capabilities and everything. I think I really disproved that in February when I utterly destroyed the British women's deadlift and bench press records. And yeah, it went viral off the back, but it's just making a very simple point. This is not, the goal should not be to create any kind of wedge or division or war between men and women, which is what so many people seem to be trying to do. And it really, really puzzles me. And I think I find it extra weird because I'm someone who's grown up in multiple different cultures. So I was born here in the UK. As I said earlier, my parents' background is originally from Nigeria. I grew up and lived in Saudi Arabia for 2 decades. And I've also had a lot of exposure to the American culture and the American schooling system. And particularly in Saudi Arabia and Nigeria, like the whole concept of men and women being totally the same is just, it's the most bizarre concept there, right? If I go and I talk to my uncles or aunties in Nigeria and I even try to explain my viral deadlift tweet to them, it doesn't make sense, right? They just look at me weirdly because no part of it, they don't have the context, right? No part of it makes sense. If I say I identified as a woman, they'll, wait, what? You know, if I say, yeah, there's this thing going on in the UK and the US, right? You have biological men competing against biological women, and what? You know, none of it makes sense, right? And so I just think it's really important to express that you don't need to Okay, let me phrase this correctly. I feel like in the past couple of decades, there has been a good and a positive effort to uplift women and girls in society, okay? However, a big mistake that I think has been made in this is thinking that in order to do that, that in order to uplift women and girls, that you have to push down men and boys. And I think people are now waking up to the fact that this is happening. I think that's why a lot of people are in this room. I imagine a lot of people have seen this, right? You know, having the whole idea of the male gender is toxic. Masculinity in itself is a problem or some kind of pathology. If little boys act like little boys, there's something wrong with them. We need to give them drugs. We need to calm them down. We need to stop them running around outside. We want to stop them play fighting. All that kind of stuff is a problem, right? To uplift one group, you do not need to push down another group, okay? Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I mean, so just earlier today, before I came to this actually, I went to go visit my brother, his wife, and their family. So they've got two kids, one girl, one boy. It was my nephew's birthday just a couple of days ago, so I went to give him a present and just hang out with him and everything like that. So for me, I don't yet have any kids of my own. If you follow me on Twitter, you know that I want to be rich enough to have 50 in the future, but we'll see how that works out. But yeah, I have nine nieces and nephews, 5 nieces, 4 nephews. And so I do spend a lot of time sort of looking at where the culture is going, see how society is speaking to people, and considering how is stuff going to be for them in the future. I imagine, I know there's lots of parents in this room, and I'm sure you constantly think about that, right? What's life going to be like for my son, for my daughter? I was reading, last year I read that book by Dr. Warren Farrell, The Boy Crisis. I imagine some people have read that, yeah? And one thing that really stuck out to me in that is that they were saying now in modern Western societies, when they've polled people now actually have a preference to have daughters rather than sons. I'm not saying that the preference should be to have sons rather than daughters, but it struck me as very interesting that it had shifted quite strongly to the real preference being to have daughters. And that was largely because people were thinking, well, we think it's going to be easier for them, right? Society is going to be better to them, going to be kinder to them, everything like that. And it seems like whenever there's a balance, whenever there's an imbalance that's tilted in a favor that goes against the narrative, then people don't want to talk about this, right? You hear about certain gender gaps all the time. I'm not even going to talk about the wage one because we all know how silly that is. I'm sure people have looked into that. But it seems like whenever there's an issue that negatively impacts boys and men far more than it impacts girls and women, then you're kind of not supposed to talk about it, right? You're not meant to talk about it. And I think this is one of the ultimate struggles of a man and being masculine, is that you're not supposed to be hyper emotional and complain about all your problems and whine and do this and that, right? You're supposed to be the firm rock, okay? You're supposed to be more stoic. You're supposed to be the person people can rely on and everything. But that can go too far to the point that men feel like they're taking all of this burden and there's no one that they can talk to. There's no outlet. It's all just on you. That's why you see things like the biggest killer of men in the Western world under the age of 50 is suicide. That's insane, right? That's crazy. That's the sign that there's something going wrong there, right? So men need to be able to talk, need to be able to express, and need to be able to just be men, right? Without thinking that they're doing something wrong or society telling them that they are doing something wrong. So finally, I want to leave some time for a Q&A, but I think it's really important that we as a society, I know people in this room are not doing it. So when I say we, I'm talking about the media, I'm talking about entertainment, I'm talking about advertising agencies, I'm talking about politicians. Everybody, when they're speaking about men, need to stop looking as men as some kind of pathological, criminal, potential rapists, evil people. And we need to remember that men are inventors, creators, builders, brothers, fathers, friends, and husbands, boyfriends, all of these wonderful things. And I think that when men are at their best, I mean, wow. That's how we've got this society that we've got, and it's incredible. So just to reiterate, right, it's not a war. It's not men versus women. It's not boys versus girls, right? If you have any functioning society, any functioning civilization, you want to make sure that you have an environment where both of these sexes can flourish, can be themselves, can embrace each other, and can work together to help make things better. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
It's not so much of a question, more of a point, really. You made the statement about the biggest killer of men being suicide, younger men being suicide, and that men need to talk more. That may be true, but I would say the biggest killer is, in fact, what men hear and receive, rather than not talking.
Amen. I agree.
Thank you for your nice talk. One question I have, the phenomenon which I have seen is that the laws of those societies change their behaviors. For example, the kind of marriage laws, the marital laws we have in common law jurisdiction has phenomenally changed the system of marriage, the institution of marriage. There are more unmarried couple cohabiting than married couple ever before in human history. We have a situation where now men are being treated almost as criminal, consider the domestic violence or any other laws for that matter. What do you think would be a good handle to have a kind of legislative change? Because even when we are organizing events, we don't have men, which are like 50% of the entire society. So how we can achieve that strongly and in a quicker manner? Thank you.
You're welcome. That's a good question. I would say that the first starting point would be to be very specific about what people want changed. I think a lot of times people do this with all various types of discrimination or perceived discrimination, and they'll say that there's some kind of problem or some kind of issue in the institution or in the law or something like that, but they won't be very specific, which means that it's hard to hone in exactly on it. So I think with what you're saying in terms of making any legislative changes, I think people would need to be very clear. Any individuals, any groups would need to be very, very clear on what the particular law or rule that they want the focus to be on, and then rally around to gain the attention on that. That would be, I think that's the best way to kind of approach anything really, rather than kind of just being general and generic about it, being super specific and saying, okay, this law right here is discriminatory or unfair, and this is the thing that we need to change, and this is how we think it should be changed. That's how I think it should be approached.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Because of your egalitarian views, have you ever been censored by a manager or self-censored your own work?
I work for myself. I cannot be censored. No. I've had a lot of mobs come after me, as you can imagine. Not in the real world, actually. They kind of see me and they're like, "Well, I don't want to fight this guy." Yeah, online, you get that. But it's not something that I'm personally overly concerned about. And in fact, it emboldens me even more, because I do know that there are a lot of people out there who are employed or work in different sectors or in school, university. I get a lot of DMs from people telling me, like, keep doing what you're doing, keep saying what you're saying, right? Because I know that when I speak up, I know that firstly, I know I'm speaking for other people who are of a similar mind, and I know that it also emboldens and it encourages other people to do the same. So as much as people can do that, I do encourage it.
In the East, there's a 2,500-year-old tradition of seeing masculine and feminine as complementary, like yin and yang. And in the last 12 months, the American Psychological Association has classified traditional masculinity as a mental illness. So, you know, we're all waiting for sanity to break out. When do you see the tide turning? When do you think it's going to change?
Wow. That's a good question. I've been asked this a lot. I was in the USA for the last 9 weeks, did meetups in a whole bunch of different cities, and that was a very big question. When is the pendulum going to swing back to normalcy? And I think it's going to happen. It's like the answer to the last question. I think it's going to happen when more and more people rise up and speak up, right? Because what's happening at the moment is I believe like 5% of the population is cowing the other 95%. I don't think this is like a right-left, conservative, liberal issue or anything like people are trying to make it out to be. I kind of think it's like, you know, you've just kind of got bullies and people who have some really, really radical and crazy ideas who are very, very loud and make themselves seem like they're far more numerous than they are. But actually, if you ask most normal people, they're like, no, I don't stand for that. But those same normal people also don't want to speak up because they don't want to be the hammer that, you know, sticks up and, sorry, the nail that sticks up and gets the hammer, right? So I think because of that, it's important for people to do these things a little bit more collectively and not leave people individually to hang out and dry, whether it's in your workplace, your university, wherever you are. If you're seeing something that's just really, really unfair, or if they want to put in a policy or something that's totally ridiculous, doesn't make sense, I think it's important for multiple people to stand up and say, no, this is we're not having this, and this isn't. Yeah, thank you. You know, it's really similar to the issue that I highlighted at the beginning of the year about, you know, what's going on in women's sports, right? What's happening at the moment is, you know, 1 or 2 people are saying it, and then that gives the mob a target, like, oh, cool, we can all go for this guy, we can all go for that woman, we can all. I mean, I think what needs to happen is all of those female athletes need to come together and just say, look, okay, we're not going to draw this line, because everyone's trying to toe this weird, bizarre political correctness. Everyone knows that it's ridiculous. Like, no, people are like, this is not fair. Everybody knows it's not fair, but people don't want to say it. And that's really like a type of pathological political correctness. And that's what people need to stand up to. It doesn't mean people need to go crazy and radical or anything like that. It's just being normal and saying, wait, no, hang on, all right? This is a bad idea, and here's why it's a bad idea. But yeah, do it in a group.
I just wanted to talk about gratefulness, because you've got a lot of psychological studies talking about if you think of 3 things that you can be grateful for compared to 1 thing that you're unhappy about, you can start wiring the brain to be in a more positive mind frame.
Yeah.
In Protestant religion, Catholic, Christian religion, you had couch your blessings, say grace. We're missing that a lot in society. We're not grateful to our parents, we're not grateful to our teachers, our coaches, the people who do things, the work that we don't see, that we take for granted. Is there a place for our old religions in the future, or are we going to have to evolve a new religion like, I've got Ken Wilber's integral religion? That's the only new one that's really taking root anywhere. But is there a space for our old religions, or should we start developing our own new one, new age?
Good question, thank you. I'm a lifelong Christian, so I'm probably biased, but I think the old religions are really good. I think they're really good for the most part, especially if you take what are the core foundational lessons of each one. I know in any holy book you can go and you can flip back to the Old Testament and you can find something that sounds crazy. You can flip through the Quran, you can find something that sounds crazy. I'm totally aware of some of these challenges. So it's not I don't want to bring this into a does God exist argument, but in terms of the sort of the fundamental values and morals and principles that you could draw, say, from a religion like Christianity, which is the main religion of the UK and the USA, then yeah, absolutely. If people have other ways of putting that together without the holy books and some of the other stuff that comes with it, then as far as I'm concerned, that's totally fine. But what you said is so right. I always say the two things that are really, really missing in the modern Western world in terms of people being happy are gratitude and perspective, right? Gratitude and perspective. That's why I think it's important to know history. And if you look through history, you really, really quickly learn just how wonderful stuff is right now. Like, it's really, really good in 2019. Or also if you just are aware of what's going on around the world. You know, whenever someone is complaining to me like crazy about the UK or complaining about the US, Brexit, Trump, like whatever, I'm like, tell me where you'd rather live or tell me in which decade you would have rather lived, right? Most people know that we have it much better than our grandparents did. And as long as you remember that and you just practice gratitude every day, then yeah, you'll be a much more positive person.
Hello. I'm actually an ex-feminist. I found funny and now that I'm aware of the way society treats men, and I see it firsthand through my partner, I won't get into details because it's quite upsetting. I just wanted to know, I know all men are different, but in general, how can women support the men in their lives or men in general?
Sure. Yeah, cool. Thank you. I'm glad you saw the light. That's a good question. So how can women support men?
Appreciation.
Yeah, appreciation and gratitude. In the same way, I think it should be the other way around as well. And embracing some of the differences, right? Again, I think that's one of the biggest problems of the sort of lie or narrative that the modern incarnation of feminism is selling to women, is that you must be more like men or you must compete with men on every level. And I don't call myself a feminist, but I'm kind of like, well, isn't that, right? That's not the right message that should be there, right? Why is the competition always about who can earn more money, who can be the CEO, who can do this, who can that? It's like, you know, some of these things are naturally, I mean, most men don't even want to be CEOs. But it does turn out, if you know about personality differences and things like that, especially if you're talking about disagreeable mindsets, if you're talking about competitive natures, we know that, you know, the same reason the majority of CEOs are men is the same reason the majority of violent criminals are men, right? It's the same personality dimension, just expressed in a positive way and in a negative way. So, yeah. So I think, yeah, men and women, it's good to be men and women. Like, the differences are awesome. It's how we got here. It's literally why we exist. The differences are fine. So I think in terms of supporting each other, it's really a matter of embracing those differences, treating people, just being kind, right? Treating everybody kindly and genuinely treating people fairly. Not the weird sort of, ooh, this group has more institutional power, so I can be mean to them. But if they're mean to me, then it's awful. Like true equality, true fairness, and true kindness. Cool. One more question.
Yeah, I haven't really formulated this question.
Closer.
I haven't really formulated this question sort of properly in my head, but there's a thing that I think I've called it the 60-10 rule, where I've noticed a lot of people who are rightly outraged that the criminal justice system has a 10% penalty for being black, think it's perfectly okay to have a 60% penalty for being male. And I just wondered what you made of that and whether that was just a way in or anything.
Wow. Sorry, what's the exact question?
I was really what you made of the fact that a lot of people are rightly outraged.
Complain about the 10% disparity, but not the 60% disparity. Yeah. Okay. And those are facts. I didn't know the numbers.
Yeah?
Yeah? Okay. Whoa. I would say, see, this is the problem. We're living in times where if stuff goes against the chosen narrative, You don't hear about it, okay? So right now, 2019, let's keep it 100, right? The current narrative is that white people are privileged, black people, people of color, hate that term, are marginalized, women are marginalized, right? There's certain, it's in one direction. So anytime there are examples of stuff going in the other direction, it gets quashed. That's probably why I didn't even know about that 60% statistic, right? I've heard the 10% one, because that goes in the narrative. I've never heard the 60% one. And that's a problem, right? I think if people really want to be against discrimination, if people genuinely want to be against racism, genuinely want to be against sexism, genuinely want to be against any of these types of unfair discrimination or bigotry, then people need to do that regardless of which direction it's running in, right? It's why I'm not cool with like what this weird trendy anti-white racism. It's not cool, right? It's not cool. I don't buy the idea that, oh, men can't be sexist because men have the institutional power. Black people can't be racist, right? Or you can't be racist against white people because they have It's BS. It's all, I don't cuss, but it's frustrating. It's nonsense. It's nonsense, right? I believe in true, actual equality, right? And it's so weird that I find myself sometimes having to explain this to people and they're arguing with me about it, right? And I'm just like, no, like it's not bad in one direction and fine in the other direction. So anytime that, you know, people are able to see, again, specific instances of these things, I think that really needs to be pointed out and brought to the fore in the same way it would be if the shoe were on the other foot, okay? If that disparity or, you know, discrimination or unfairness was happening to another group or in another direction, how would people react to it? And think about it that way. Thank you so much for listening and thank you for your questions. I appreciate it.